thank you for coming. I know it's a little tight quarters right now, and we did not quite expect this size of a crowd. We expected a lot of people. This is the first lunchtime in our series that we've done, and really appreciate you coming. And I heard the Brownsville one the other night was really, really good.
Yes.
A lot of details from that. So thank you for coming. I'm Paul Aziz, the mayor of Lebanon, and I'm the president of our foundation, the Lebanon Museum Foundation. We started about 2 years ago. We have hundreds of items in our collection now. The only thing that we're working on is we're working on a building. And one of the other things that we've done is that we've had these our Lebanon Story series, and Tony kicked us off about 1.5 years ago with our very first one on the California Indians. And so we did that, and now we've moved on and we've done Bob and Betty Adams. Are they here?
Yep. Betty just came in.
Oh, hi, Betty. And they did one on the pharmacy, and we had some really, really great talks. We hope that you'll come again and continue our educational series. We also have sign-up sheets on the front. I know a lot of people just kind of came in real quick. If you could please sign up, we can get your name. We'll put you on our newsletter. We got a newsletter. We've got a website and Facebook, and you can follow us on what we're doing and all the exciting things we have. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my Vice President, Linda Ziedrich, and she's going to introduce our speaker. Thanks again for coming today.
Welcome, and thank you all for coming. How many of you know Tony Farque? Okay, most people. He's a popular guy. Tony has been the archaeologist for the Sweet Home Ranger District of the Willamette National Forest for 41 years, and his talks are very popular. We have one copy left of a list of his upcoming talks, so somebody might want to grab that. His walks are very popular, his guided walks in the forest, and he's a very entertaining fellow. So I will say no more. Please welcome Tony.
Welcome, everybody. Who's been on the Santiam Wagon Road at some point? Wow, that's good. It's long, isn't it? You walked the whole thing? Well, just on the forest.
I took horses and mules.
23 miles. This gentleman blogged part about outdoors with horses and mules. So there's people here have helped us restore, bring it back, and do all the things we need to do. So any friend of the Santiam Wagon Road is a friend of mine. Because any day you're on the Santiam Wagon Road is a great day. We've been out there in pouring rain, building fires out of bark chimneys to try to keep warm. And it's still a great day, because you never know what you're going to run into, or who will be there, what they'll be doing. People with goats, and horses, and mules, and bicycles. We've had a few old cars out there. We've had a couple of old early vehicles show up for little bits of entertainment and give people rides. And I want to thank everybody for supporting our efforts to locate, document, preserve, protect, and interpret the Santiam Wagon Road. It takes a large group of people to do that. I want to acknowledge Ann Rogers right off the bat, a great archaeologist who early on in trying to identify the wagon road walked how many miles of that?
A lot.
17 miles.
More than once.
We determined the wagon road was not just more than once, yes.
We got more than once.
Not just a narrow strip of passage, but actually it really reflects a corridor of travel and cultural use through time. It's a braided corridor. So we need to look at a broader area than just the roadbed itself. So we were fortunate in the Willamette National Forest Plan in the early 1990s, we designated the Wagon Road corridor the significant corridor, making it a special interest area to be protected, 660 feet wide. 330 feet on each side of the road, in the middle of the road. So any activities that occur within that 660 feet have to be specifically designed to protect the wagon road and enhance those qualities for which it was established. And Ann Rogers had to cover that whole 17 miles, 660 feet wide, with a big crew.
Yeah.
Changed their lives forever.
Oh, yes.
All right. This is about 8 hours worth of material. So we'll go through it quickly. It'll be like a mosaic of people's faces and names and hats. You look at a picture of any gathering of people this size or any size, more than 3 people in the historic era on the Santiam Wagon Road, everybody's wearing a hat. There's one back there. That's good. So I brought a few of them along today. Before, there was a wagon road. There was a trail. Not on the same route. There was a trail by the people who were here before the European invasion, American Indians. And they were here, and you know what? The South Santiam corridor was a primary travel way for the tribes for at least 8,000 years. There were a carpet of artifacts from Lebanon to Sisters. Sorry, Linn County. It wasn't Highway 126. Sorry, Marion County. It wasn't Highway 22. It was right through Linn County. Right up to Highway 24 was the primary travel way and use way for the tribes for a long, long, long time. So there was footprints on the ground before Europeans needed to have a wagon road. We find archaeological evidence of all kinds of cultural activities by the tribes up and down the corridor. Everything from hunting to tool making to food and medicine, harvesting and processing, and religious activities occurring from place to place, spiritual activities as well. So they had churches along the way, along with rest areas, camp stops, kitchens, hunting grounds, same kind of things that we would do if we were going to be starting out in a new place today. This is my Teddy Roosevelt hat. We thank Theodore Roosevelt for conservation in this country. He's truly a great guy. Well, the first non-tribal people to come through the Santiam Pass were the Hudson's Bay trappers, looking for beaver and mink and fox. There was no sea otters in this part of the world. They loved those too. They were busy. In 1825, Finan McDonald and Thomas McKay came through Santiam Pass. They marked the pass for travel ways for other Hudson's Bay trappers to come through later. In the following year, Joseph Jervis came through in 1826. He also marked the pathway. And Peter Ogden Skeen came through a few years later. He had some difficulty. He went through 50 miles of 6-foot deep snow with his horses and mules. But they didn't connect it through. They didn't make the wagon road connection. They came through Santiam Pass coming from Klamath Falls country and cut over the pass, Santiam Pass, and then went down the North Santiam, went down to Fort Vancouver. In the valley, people were starting to come down from the Portland area because as settlers came west, they came down the Columbia River. It was a very perilous passage from the Dalles west. In the 1840s, people were losing their lives and all their belongings as the rafts would flip over in the rapids in the Columbia River, which runs quite a bit of water from time to time. And the Barlow Road opened up, bringing people around the southern flank of Mount Hood to get the settlers in. But it was had some very steep grades. It was a difficult passage. And there was discussion in the valley, in this location, in Lebanon and Albany, to try to push a road on through, directly from this part of Willamette Valley. Why? Because there was red meat on the hoof, right here. By 1850, there were 150,000 cattle in the central Willamette Valley. Way more cattle than there was feed for them. Ewing Young, in the late 30s, 1830s, was hired by the local folks to go into the Sacramento area. He drove up the Jesse Applegate Trail in California, 630 head of cattle, which in 18 years turned into 150,000 head. There were 60,000 horses, about 40,000 sheep. It was a lot. Too much for what was here. Gold had been struck in Idaho, Central Oregon, and the market was there. And the story of the American West really is boom and bust cycles. And the people who were here had been successful, some of them, going down to California in the gold mining days of 49 and 50. They come back. Gold was struck in north central Oregon, and there were hungry miners. Ewing Young, the man who brought the cattle into the valley, had settled here in the early 1830s with our first territorial marshal, Joe Meek. No man like Joe. 6'4", 225 pounds. He's a Rocky Mountain trapper with Bridger, Kit Carson, and all the Rocky Mountain men. And he's quite a character. Joe Meek walked from Idaho to St. Louis to Washington, D.C. On the second trip he made that, these guys were mountain men, they could do that. The second trip he walked with Sacagawea's son, Jean Baptiste, who was also a miner and a mountain man. Well, so the group of entrepreneurial Lebanese, people from Lebanon, headed by Luther Elkins, who was very dignified and wore a hat like this in some of the pictures. Very nice.
Sorry.
Formed, excuse me,
Sorry.
the Cascade, Willamette Valley Cascade Mountain Wagon Road Company in the early 1860s. Hereafter referred to as the old Santiam Wagon Road. It's a shorter name. And he, along with Wheeler and Joe Claypool and Mears, and Jacobs, some local folks, put money into a company to build the road. Thinking, wouldn't it be great if we could get our cattle to the hungry miners, the people in Central Oregon and North Central Oregon, who would pay dearly for cattle on the hoof. So it was an economic enterprise, well thought out, smartly devised. And the operation of the company is extremely well chronicled. And there's 2 copies of this in this library, History of the Wagon Road, by Cleon Clark, who's a forest supervisor on the Deschutes National Forest, who when he retired spent 25 years researching it and wrote down the operations, the business side of it. The operations of the Wagon Road are partly chronicled from 1910 on in this book, Ann's favorite book. We love this book. Honeymoon on Horseback by Margie Knowles. We'll talk about that in a minute. So if you split the Wagon Road discussion into operations and the business side of things, it's 2 really long discussions. The business side, we're not going to spend much time on today, except to say that it was a successful venture. The goals were reached the cattle drives happened, the markets were reached, and some people made some money. They had toll gates established, so you passed and paid your ticket to get into the Disneyland. You paid your way to go to the Promised Land. Now, Central Oregon was vacant of American citizens at this time. In the 1850s, the Indian Wars south of the Dalles had kept settlers out. So this not only served as a pathway to take horses and cattle east to the markets, it was the primary route for settlement from the central Willamette Valley to settling Central Oregon. And some of the folks who were in the Wagon Road Company, Wheeler and Claypool, relocated over there, had successful ranches, and had quite a lengthy career. Wheeler also served as Linn County Sheriff at one time. These are prominent citizens. Folks who worked hard, weren't afraid to take risk, and celebrated their successes as well. The toll gates, one was established at the John Gilliland Ranch between Foster, Oregon and Canyon Creek, east of Sweet Home. The other toll gate was at Cache Creek, now on the east side of the mountains, and now on the Deschutes, the western slope of the Deschutes National Forest. $6 get you passage with a wagon with 4 horses. If you were a permanent resident west of the Cascades, for $5 you got a year pass. That was the way to go. Single horses were $2. Each head of cattle was 50 cents. Clear on down to eventually they decided to charge 3 cents for a hog. Sheep were 20. Most wagon roads, what really stands out about this one, it's so different because most wagon roads are meant to bring immigration west from a country which is expanding in the eastern part of the continent. They're already here. This wagon road was different because it took goods east, and the settlement occurred from the west side of the Cascades over the mountains into a void in Central Oregon after the Indian Wars had subsided in the 1850s. There was basically space available. That sets it aside from the other routes completely. Construction was begun in the 1864, 65. There's various accounts of it. And it took a lot of hard work. A lot of hard work to build it. People really worked then. There were places where there were 9 fords of the South Santiam River, 7 bridges at one time. Unfortunately, the people who located the road picked the side of the road where most of the Indian sites were not, so there's still some archaeology for us to find on the north slope of the river. So we thank them for that and their wisdom. And when the wagon road did cross over to the north side, it was going up 7 Mile Hill. The most dreaded part of the entire passage. If you've walked it with me, you know you want to go down
Yeah.
7 Mile Hill. Going up it is a day's work and a half for sure. Okay, I'll put these guys up. In 1871, Joe Claypool had already landed on the other side of the mountains, and he and Henry Burmester were operating the roadhouse at Fish Lake. There were a number of stops along the wagon road. You could stop at the Gibbleton Ranch, just east of Sweet Home. You could get food at the Maley place, Carl's Maley, in that same area. You get to the Walton Ranch, near the Trout Creek Campground on the other side of the river from that today, where you could get good accommodations. For 25 cents, you get a room, a bed, probably in the barn in the hay. You get 25 cents, you get 2 bits, you get some food. And for 2 bits, you could stable up your horse for the night. That was the standard fare and cost for stopping over on any of the rest stops, any of the roadhouses. Eventually, there was a hotel run by the Kiesendorfers at Cascadia. Upper Soda, where the Mountain House ended up being after it was moved, after the '64 flood, along Highway 20. There was a hotel there, the bridge that came across. And the man who located the route for the wagon road is given credit for its location. There's a creek named for him and a butte named for him. He was a pioneer who brought people from Missouri to the Willamette Valley. He knew how to navigate, he knew the West, he knew how to get things done. A man who lived with wolves under his house. A man who knew the tribes, who went over the trails with the Kalapuya tribes, by some Molal as well. Andrew Wiley. A little man, a wiry Wiley for sure, he must have been. And he opened up a roadhouse at the bottom of 7 Mile Hill, and that was the original location for the Mountain House. If you go across the Tiwi Creek now on the bridge, come off Highway 20, and stop on that bridge and look down the South Santiam River, his original Mountain House sat about 300 meters downstream on the south bank. 64 flood took it all away. It's all gone. But you could stop there, and people enjoyed that rest stop at Andrew Wiley's, because they'd either just come down the 7 Mile Hill, needed to clean out their shorts, or they were resting before they went up the 7 Mile Hill and needed to get some fluids in their body and hydrate, because the 7 Mile Hill was indeed a challenge. If you continued up and over the 7 Mile Hill, the next roadhouse rest stop was at Fish Lake, where Henry Burmester and Joe Claypool ran the operation. It was the primary stop along the whole route. A hotel, a saloon, a store, a campground, a nice livery barn. The best fishing on the whole route, Fish Lake, you would think so, right? Pretty good hunting around that country as well. And Joe Claypool started an operation where he brought passengers from Prineville to Lebanon and Albany on the Joe Claypool stage. I want to read a few passages today from some of the people that were there, because they have an interesting choice of words. This is June 30th, 1871, in the Albany Democrat-Herald. That was a while ago. Claypool arrived down from his Fish Lake Ranch last Saturday, where he's doing a good business in trading with travelers and drovers over the Cascade Mountains. People going to Central Oregon, traveling, coming back. They would bring wool back with them in their wagons for the woolen mills in Brownsville, and they would take fruit home to Central Oregon. So the wagon and the travelers were moving quite a bit. And the drovers, people taking the cattle and the sheep to market. Cattle going east to the markets, sheep coming west to be sheared after they graze in the mountains, and then the wool would be taken in to the woolen mills. He says the snow has just about all but disappeared, and the mud is fast drying up. 2 sets of hands are at work on the road. Every year, this is in June, every year, it took a big work crew to go open the road up. This is 2 crews working, one on Moss Butte on this end, and the other on the other side of the mountain. They're filling mud holes, clearing away stumps, roots, logs, and rocks, and cutting around all immovable obstructions. And we don't think of obstructions as immovable anymore. Before they had chainsaws, when a 6-foot diameter Douglas fir tree fell across the wagon road moved. Because the tree was immovable. So that's partly why we get this braided travelway going across the canyon, because there were mudslides and trees down. Joe Claypool continues, blackberries are already ripening, and thousands of bushels can soon be had for picking. Pleasure seekers and hunters are thronging in, and in a few weeks the whole line of the road will be dotted with tents of those who have flown from the dust and heat of our cities to revel in the cool shades and inhale the life-giving breezes of the Cascades. Great Joe Claypool. Another Claypool quote from the 1870s in the Albany Democrat Herald is titled "A Stampede." Claypool tells us that last night, while about 500 cattle were in a stock corral at Fish Lake, where they had the hotel and the saloon and the campground, a panther, a cougar, got among them and made a terrible scatterment. I love that word. Scatterment. Now that's a different image than a stampede, doesn't it? A stampede seems to be in one direction. A scatterment would be hard to deal with, wouldn't it? 500 head of cattle in a terrible scatterment. The cattle ran bawling about, and at last broke out of the enclosure and took to the woods and hills like all possessed. Even a few of them in the great terror jumped into the lake, but the icy water seemed to cool their nerves, and they came out wetter, if not wiser, beasts. This is a stagecoach driver. Pretty good, huh? As the scatterment occurred during the silent watches of the night while the drovers were asleep, the wildest confusion was created in the camp, and the terrified men fled almost as fleetly as the cattle, as many believed they were in the midst of an earthquake, and the great rocks and trees were tossing through the air in every direction. Several days are spent gathering up the cattle again, and many are not yet recovered. It is believed that about 25 or 30 head have gone so far into the wilderness where the woodbine twineth that it will be impossible to find them. Claypool was quite a character indeed. His stagecoach would bring people from Prineville to Fish Lake and would spend the night there. That was between a day to a 2-day travel, depending on the weather conditions and the immovable obstructions which might be encountered. They would be all salooned up, they'd be rested, they would fish at Fish Lake, and in the morning, Henry Burmister's great baritone voice would wake them up as he sang across Fish Lake from the shores. Quite an outing at Fish Lake, indeed. In 1875, there was tragedy there. Charity Ann Marks was traveling through, about to give birth, went into labor, passed away with herself and her infant child, and is buried at Fish Lake, right next to the wagon road. The 3 C's later went and put a nice enclosure around her grave. There's an interpretive sign there, and the Forest Service did a good job of that. And she lies there. We've had her family come back with their Bibles, stand around her grave, and talk to her and read the history of what's happened in their family since she's been gone. It's pretty nice. You stand on the edge of the enclosure, the fence around her resting place, turn and look to the southeast, and there she is. The 3 sisters, Charity facing her. You put her in the right place. So there's great levity, great fun, great liquoring up, and there's some tragedy as well there. We find, interestingly enough, as archaeologists, that the tribes came and used the wagon road as well, because we find peeled cedar along the wagon road route, and recorded some of those sites for us. Thank you. The tribes had come, and they needed to peel off the western red cedar the bark to make baskets to bring in huckleberries with them and other medicines they might be carrying. So it was a tribal route, and it became a European route, and the tribes came back and used it again, because it was a great passageway. It worked out pretty well. Once you got to the toll gate, the gates were made of large timbers, crudely roughed out, big posts, a sign that tells you what to do, big padlock, big chains. You couldn't chop your way through with an axe. It was serious business. You had to stop, and you had to find the gatekeeper. John Gilliland was the first gatekeeper. Was transferred later to the Booths and then to the Nye family, had it for generations. Once you got the gatekeeper's attention, they would show up. You would pay first, then they would unlock the gate, swing it open, and you go through, and you were given a ticket. You know what? You had to have a ticket to get out on the other end. Margie Knowles talks about that in the book. She said, if you didn't have a ticket, you had some splaining to do. Now, if you lived inside the gates, there are a few settlers and people who have pioneered and homesteaded. You had free passage. You didn't have to pay every time you came out and went to see your relatives and come back in. That was very few and far between, for sure. Judge Waldo, from Waldo Lake and the Waldo Hills fame in Oregon history, a Supreme Court justice for Oregon, a senator, he used the Santiam Wagon Road in the late 1880s and 1890s when he was getting a little bit more feeble and his asthma was giving him trouble in the mountains. He had come from Salem to explore the Cascades from Mount Hood to Mount Shasta. And from Salem, he went through the Waldo Hills, up through the Courtsville Mining District to Daly Lake Country, and that was his headquarters for much of his exploration. But as he got older, he wanted to take the stage, and he came down here to Lebanon and Albany, hooked on with Joe Claypool's ride, got up to Fish Lake, and his men, his traveling companions, his brother-in-law Hummison's Ducombe and States, would come from Salem and meet him there. Then they would head down towards Mount Shasta. So Waldo put his footprints at Fish Lake on the wagon road as well. I forgot to mention that when they were building the road, another famous name for all this associated with it, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. The construction crew thought it was a revolution and the country was being attacked, and all left their jobs, and the wagon road was just left for the army to work on for a while. And the wagon road company, through some connections through Wheeler and the Indian agents, brought back, probably not voluntarily, some of the tribal members who had been removed from this area to work on the wagon road through their old country. So there's that chapter. Probably a lot more to tell about that. In fact, as Claypool's stagecoach came rumbling down the South Santiam between the Mountain House and the toll gate, they were held up a few times. I'm not sure normal stagecoach hold up. They were held up by Indians. Ann thinks they were probably Santiam Molala. We don't know. They didn't want money. It didn't hurt anybody. They wanted some food. Looked like they had come down from the great benches at 3,000 feet where we know they had their medicine, their hunting, their fish, and their cabins up at Gordon Meadows. The old trail went straight down. If you hike that trail today from that location, the Wagon Road, you want to come down from Gordon Meadows. This is even worse than the 7 Mile Hill, straight up. We call that the edge of the world site. And I take a hike there occasionally. You can hook on with us and come to the edge of the world and look over from the rocks, and it's 2,000 feet down to the Wagon Road below it. And those Indians have gone up and down that just to get some food. Interesting chapter for sure. Well, I bet you didn't think Lewis and Clark was involved in this story, did you? Of course, the tribes call them Clueless and Lark. Because Lewis and Clark had come down the Columbia River some years before, and in 1905 we were celebrating the centennial anniversary of their stay in Oregon, the Greater Roads Association of America, directed by William Abbott from the Secretary of Agriculture's office, decided to co-locate the Greater Roads Association National Meeting with the Lewis and Clark Exposition, Centennial Exposition in Portland, Oregon in 1905. Because the roads were in terrible shape in this country at the time, the Greater Roads Association thought it would be a good idea to promote road building and raise the quality of motoring across the continent, which hadn't really existed very much yet at all. And Oldsmobile Motors, Ransom Olds' company, decided to promote a race. It was actually a publicity stunt. Two 1904 curved dash Oldsmobiles with a rudder for a steering wheel, 7 horsepower, 1 cylinder, very weak brakes, no reverse, no windshield, weighed 600 pounds, carried about 1,200 pounds worth of gear on them, each one of them. 2 of them were commissioned to travel across the United States from Hellgate Circle in New York City to the Lewis and Clark Exposition in Portland, Oregon. It took them 44 days, averaging 16 hours a day of driving. Dwight Huss, who was a famous motorist at the time, who had been in a cross Europe race, eventually became the first man to drive a car into the Kremlin, of all things, and worked for Henry Ford in designing Fords for 30 years thereafter. Dwight Huss piloted, that's all you can really call it. He piloted the first car, Old Scout. In those days, you traveled with your own mechanic with you. Who wouldn't have liked that at one time in their life or another? Milford Weigel, I love these names, Milford Weigel accompanied Dwight Huss in Old Scout. The other car was Old Steady. Percy McGargle, another motorist of the time, piloted Old Steady, and his mechanic was Barton Stanchfield. They traveled through the gumbo of Iowa. There's books about these guys traveling through the central part of the country. They just traveled together until they really reached Prineville, and then the race actually began. Dwight Huss had invented some tools that he kept secret from Percy McGargle for changing the tires more quickly. Oldsmobile was sending gasoline and parts ahead along the rail lines. Part of the route was along railroads. They realized when they got to this part of the world, they heard that this wagon road was open in 1905. It was past its peak period of use, which was from 1880 to 1910.
Good, I didn't know there was.
Thank you. So our restoration target for the wagon road is to bring it back to its visual characteristics and its qualities from its peak period of use, 1880 to 1910. Giant trees before the big fires had happened. It was nice. The race had begun. Old Scout got into Prineville, left Prineville first, got into Sisters first. And both drivers, the first east-west continental crossing of the United States, both drivers are pilots of these vehicles. In their memoirs later, emphatically stated the most perilous part of the entire cross-country ordeal was a 7-mile hill. Right here, in our beloved Linn County. Think of it, it was a stock drive, wasn't it? So they were taking the cattle up the hill. We have named one of the ridges on the edge of the 7-mile hill for Dwight Huss, who was the winning driver. We have Huss Ridge. So if you're in Linn County Sheriff, or the Forest Service, or Search and Rescue, or BLM, when you call in to give people your location and find out what's going on out in the forest, you use the Huss Ridge repeater. So Dwight Huss is still on the map. Quite a character. He pulled into Portland 8 days before McGargle made it. Dwight Huss arrived 62 minutes before the opening of the Lewis and Clark exposition. He looked like a complete wild man. Pictures are taken of Dwight Huss and Milford Weigel with their feet up on the edge of Old Scout, and they're just caked with mud. They're gaunt. They've each lost 30 pounds, and their eyes are just wild as you've ever seen anybody look, ever. And all around them are the finest citizenry of Portland in there. Every one of them has these very cool hats on, and they're the toast of the town. $1,000 prize to the winner. That was a lot of money in 1905. Got to keep with the car. And I guess he was the toast of the town and celebrated enthusiastically. 8 days later, Percy McGargle and Barton Stanchfield arrived. There's nobody there. They asked him, well, Percy, what's it like to be second in a 2-car race? Last. McGargle, being the spirited man that he was, looks around and says, it's great to be young, crazy, and ride around in an automobile. That was my life in the 50s. We remember that. The Forest Service was founded that same year, 1905. We had no permanent ranger in this area until 1910, when our first ranger shows up. Uh-oh, I'm in the ranger hat. This is an old one. Archie Knowles, the first white child born in the Siuslaw Valley. Arrived with an appointment from the government to be the first full-time ranger in the Cascadia Ranger District, which is now Sweet Home. Changed the name. Archie was quite a character. They spent 2 years, Archie and his wife Margie, on the Santiam Wagon Road. That was their route of travel for all their work, fighting fires, administering the grazing permits, keeping the sheepmen and the Indians apart for the competing stock was limited grass for the Indian horses and the stockmen's sheep. And she wrote it into a book called Honeymoon on Horseback. Highly recommended. They don't have it in this library we checked. Margie was something else. She tells us her daughter Mary gave us the copy of the book, and Anne interviewed her. Thank you. That was good. They had 2 children, lived in tents, administered a couple 100,000 acres of your national forest. Archie was quite a character. She had a trick horse named Pet that was rodeo trained, and you could stand on the horse behind the saddle. So Archie would ride into camp, standing behind the saddle. And so when the trail camp would see him coming, they'd see Archie coming over the ridge first. It was beautiful. It's beautiful attire. Well, it's too hot. Whipcord stitch wool. And then the horse would show up, Archie would tell him he had arrived, and then celebrate his arrival successfully by doing a back handspring, because he was a gymnast, off the rear end of the horse. Land in the middle of camp and start giving instructions. Their son, Carl Knowles, just passed away 3 years ago. He was born up in the Fish Lake area. Before they built the cabin, the ranger cabin at Smith Prairie, named after an old ranger from Mackenzie, Archie and Margie's first summer residence was the hotel and an old shack they called the Rat Pack Shack. The Rat Shack. Later it was called the Rat Pack Shack after Wayne Miller and the boys came up in the 50s. Remember him, don't you? And I have a couple of quotes from Margie's book for it. This is while she's staying at Fish Lake. There's a hotel, a saloon, a store, a campground there. Great scatterments are occurring and all kinds of stuff going on. One afternoon, a big touring car came down the hill. It stopped at the gate in front of the hotel. The hotel's gone. There were 4 men and a woman in it. They all got out and seemed to be glad they had arrived. They just come up the 7 Mile Hill and come to Fish Lake. We were astonished because we couldn't understand how they got up 7 Mile Hill with such a heavy car, because it's like this. That was soon settled, for a young man came down the hill driving 2 beautiful light sorrel horses hitched to a light rig. They looked so like racing stock, we wondered what they were there for. But the man said they'd sent the team ahead to wait at the foot of 7 Mile Hill and help the car up over the steep places. They intended to go over the mountains and back to Portland from there. That'd be up the east side. They went down and looked over the camp at the lake and got back in time for supper. They ate whatever was set before them. When about through, the old gray-headed man said they would like rooms for the night. Mr. Miller, the hotel proprietor, 1910, said he had 1 room available. Let me get my Mr. Miller hat on. This hat's 100 years old. 110. He had 1 room available, but the lady and her husband could have that, and the rest of the men would have to take bedding in the barn and sleep in the hay. That's the way it works. The old fellow looked around the table and said, "Well, she ain't my wife. And she ain't his. And she ain't his nor his. But she's a nice lady just the same." The room was given to her. The men all left, and the woman went to her room. The old man decided to sleep in the car parked out in front of the hotel. Mr. Miller laughed and told his son to get the shotgun. They talked a while, then shoved a couch in front of the lady's door. Mr. Miller lay down on the couch. The son bunked outside the lady's window. They were guarded. Along in the night, the owls began to hoot. Then we heard the car honking, and it kept up until everyone in camp woke up, and there were some angry folks running around. The old man had had a little too much refreshments before going to bed. When he heard the owls, he was so befuddled, he thought it was another car coming down the hill. He didn't want it to run into them. Everyone was glad when they left. Margie Knowles. She had a way with words. She continues. This book condenses their life, 1910 and 1911, on the Santiam Wagon Road. Another 7 Mile Hill story. September 4th, it started, no, wait a minute. Too far, I've done. One afternoon, here we go. About the middle of August, and an awfully hot day, 2 boys came to the door at the Geisendorfer Hotel where she was staying and asked if they could buy a loaf of bread. They paid for it and went up the Santiam Wagon Road headed east. I had asked them where they were going, and they said they're going over the mountains. Next day, the message came over the phone that 2 boys were missing from the reform school and to be on the lookout for them. We could not get the phone line cleared to let the officials know until late. And on the 3rd day, one of the guards reported a big fire on 7 Mile Hill, and they needed help. Archie got 48 men together. Archie. Archie got 48 men together and sent them up there with Mr. Hand to look after them, to fight the fire, and take charge of the crew. This began 2 of the most hectic weeks I ever experienced. Those 2 boys had gone a little way up a 7 Mile Hill and set fire on both sides of the road to prevent anyone from catching up with them. The fire roared. This is the middle of August. It's boiling hot. Steep country, it's like a chimney. The fire roared up the mountain. This documents the first arson fire on the Willamette National Forest. 3,500 acres. Archie managed to keep 100 men on the fire, but it was a heck of a job. We could hardly get tents, stoves, grub, bedding, dishes, and tools there fast enough. There were teams going and coming all the time along the wagon road. Someone hung on the phone line all day and ordered supplies, and were sending reports down to headquarters, which would have been in Albany. Albany was the headquarters for the forest at that time. Now it's in Springfield. For that period of our lives, it was a mad scramble of men, horses, grub, shovels, axes, tents, mules, pack outfits, wagons, teams, and phone calls. As I look back, I wonder how we accomplished it. We had a small 3-room house next to the hotel, 2 little children, and all the regular work to do, and men coming at all hours to be fed. September 4th, it started to rain, and the men left, and everything began coming out. There were men of all ages and sizes. Some were bone weary, and some just plain ornery. Their clothes were in all stages of dilapidation. One man had his pants burned off, and Archie had to find a pair for him before he could appear in public. Their days were 2 years' worth of stories on the wagon road, Archie and Margie. I interviewed a guy, William Richardson, 28 years ago, who was 93 at the time, and he talked about a horse drive that he was on when he was 16 in the 20s. He said it was one of the last horse drives. What happened was the horse drovers would go to Central Oregon gather up the wild horses from the bunch grass, drive them over the mountains, down into the valley, and sell them at the horse auction in Halsey to the farmers and ranchers and people eating horse flesh over here on the west side. His daughter told me, when she introduced me to him, he went by the name of Wild Bill Richardson. And that name had stuck with him his whole life since this horse drive event when he was an older young man, I mean, 16 or 18. He couldn't quite remember. His dad wanted him to become a man, thought the best thing he could do was get him on with a bunch of seasoned cowboys and some real men. So his dad sent him on a train to Portland. He went by stage to the Dalles, south to Sisters, and hooked up with a pair of brothers named the Cobb brothers. One was 6'5", the other was 5'6". They could both shoot lights out on a dead gallop on their horses. And the three of them, these two Cobb brothers, and poor old William Richardson, brought 95 head of horses from Graham Corral, just west of Sisters, which is still there, where they gathered up all the horses, over the wagon road, over the 7 Mile Hill, down the valley to the horse auction in Halsey. And they asked Wild Bill Richardson, I said, Wild Bill, what was it like? What did you see? You remember this, do you remember Iron Mountain and Jump Off Joe and the great sights that you can see, the geologic formations? And he said, all I could see was the dust and the butt end of the horses that were heading. He was the trailer. Well, they toughened him up, he said. And he went ahead and they made him purchase a horse, but his daddy gave him some money. He thought he'd get one for free for helping out. He bought a horse. Took that horse in downtown Eugene and ran some races, won a saddle and some fancy tack. And his dad took that from him because he gambled. And he was disappointed. That was the story of Wild Bill Richardson. An interesting character for sure. Well, hard times hit the country in the 20s and 30s. The Short Bridge, the covered bridge of Cascadia. John Short in the 20s rebuilt the cabins that burned down at the Fish Lake Hotel site. So the structures that are there now, the log cabins, were all built by Johnny Short, Gordon Short's dad. Gordon Short was a 3C man for the Forest Service. The Depression hit, FDR put people to work, and the root of work were the 3C boys who worked in the Santiam Canyon, where they built campgrounds. They built the Longville Organizational Camp, one of 50 of those camps built in the entire United States. It's still standing. Come there, what's the date? August 12th this year, open to the public. And we're 3C reunion where we bring back the families of the folks. There's a couple of guys, 2 of them, we hope we're going to make it this year. Remember, one of them worked in that camp in 1937. They built roads, they built lookouts, they built trails, they built a ranger station for us, they rebuilt the stock drives at Fish Lake. They built the ranger stations. Those guys really, they did stonework and woodwork. There was something to behold. The 3 C's. We thank them all. FDR, president at the time, had been the governor of New York. The neighboring governor in Pennsylvania was the first chief of the Forest Service, having retired 15 years previously, Gifford Pinchot. It's close enough to the gift. Pinchot, because of hard times in Pennsylvania, had put people to work in the Pinchot roads you can still drive on in the state of Pennsylvania today. He sent a letter to FDR, his ex-neighboring governor, and said, we put people to work in a public works program in Pennsylvania that worked great. Why don't you try that nationally? So the idea for 3 C's came from the Forest Service chief, who then retired to become the governor of Pennsylvania. So the Forest Service has its footprints all over this whole story. And Giff was quite a character himself. Ann and I showed up, started mapping the wagon road. She surveyed the whole thing, and put together a plan to protect 660 feet of it. And we got this idea. 1995. 90 years after the first transcontinental auto race. where Dwight Huss piloted Old Scout with Milford Weigel. Percy McGargle piloted Old Steady with Barton Stanchfield. And Oldsmobile was interested in doing a recreation and a celebration, a mini recreation, bringing some old cars out here and have them be on the Santiam Wagon Road, because they were aware the most challenging part of the entire cross-country route was the 7-mile hill. They all wanted to ride a car down the 7-mile hill. Of course, you couldn't do that. The '64 flood had taken out so many parts of the wagon road. It was just like the Grand Canyon in a few places. So there were sections would have been available for them. But so we took them on the section of Wagon Road from Fish Lake to Lost Prairie. Lost Prairie got its name, of course, because when Andrew Wiley was scouting for the Wagon Road route, he became lost with Johnny Gray and John Bradenberg. The three of them did the scouting. I think it's misnamed. We renamed that ridge for Dwight Huss. We should rename it Lost and Found Prairie. He climbed a tree, spotted the pass to the east, and that got his bearings. It was good with a compass, and that's how they found the pass way through. And on the way back, on the second trip through that fall, Johnny Gray was with him again, and he passed away, and he's buried up there. He's still there. So we have a marked grave for Charity Ann and her unborn child. And Johnny Gray's grave is a Dead Man's Prairie, which is up by Latiwi Mountain. Not on the wagon road, but it was on the old Indian trail that Wiley had used to find his way to the pass. Indians weren't going to go up 7 Mile Hill. No way.
No way.
They went around through Gordon Meadows and hit the ridge, went around the north side of Browder Ridge and came down. A much easier route. One other person perished on the wagon road. That was a poor trapper named Dan Sweeney. Dean Devlin back there helped us research Dan Sweeney and helped us, thank you, Dean, our GIS man for years. Helped us, yes, Dean's back there, Ann.
I know, I see him. Hi, Dean.
It's a reunion. We all sat together for 18 years or something. A trapper named Dan Sweeney, had been trapping in the wintertime. And Gordon Short, whose some of his relatives are here, had cleaned Dan Sweeney out in a card game right before Christmas. And Dan Sweeney thought he'd better head home. It was Christmas Eve, and he headed out of Fish Lake with 2 feet of snow on the ground. He had to go up over the pass, Tombstone Pass, in the wagon road, through Tombstone Prairie, which of course was named from, in 1871, October 19th, when James A. McKnight accidentally shot himself. He was 17. His tombstone was there. He was never buried there, though. They took his body down, but his mother laid the tombstone at the spot where he had passed away. But Dan Sweeney went through that spot and never made it home. We've done enough research to figure out probably what happened, because by then, that whole 7 Mile Hill fire had taken all the trees off of much of 7 Mile Hill. So he came over the pass in 2 feet of snow, followed the wagon road down the hill. He made a sharp turn to the right, and he probably kept going straight because it looked like that's where the road would be. Under snow, you couldn't tell because it was all burned off, so that you couldn't tell where the trees were in that location. He became disoriented, they figured, and they found his shoes near a creek, which now, thanks to Dean and Ann, we've renamed Sweeney Creek in his honor. They never found his wallet or any of the money that he won from your uncle. Shadowy possibilities. We're not sure what happened. So, Oldsmobile decided to put on a show. The great ranger, Rolf Anderson, who's right there. Here's the CEO of Oldsmobile, John Rock, revealing a sign about the first transcontinental race. There's Dwight Huss's granddaughter. His son was there, John Huss. Gifford Pinchot showed up. Teddy Roosevelt was there. It was wild scene of events. Oh, where's Teddy Roosevelt? Bully! It's a bully pulpit. We had worked on your behalf, we had worked for 8 years to survey the wagon road on the Willamette National Forest, do the history, put it back on the ground, put enough bridges in places where it was safe for you to use, where you could enjoy it. Part of the wagon road is under the highway, part of it is unsafe to use, so we had to build connecting recreation routes, we call them, connect you from one place that is safe to use to another place that's not under the highway. We don't want hikers walking on the highway, on Highway 20. So we have 14 miles of it up. It was reopened on that day, 1995. We had a couple hundred people there. We had Old Scout and Old Steady were there, replicas of Old Scout. McGargle didn't get $1,000 because he was second in the 2-car race, but he got Old Steady. Somehow he got back to Michigan. And at the end of that week, David Colzo, who had Old Scout there, he's in the picture right there, by the sign, in the motor coat. He had to get Old Scout back to Michigan for a car show in 2 days. How are you going to do that? It still only had 7 horsepower. Turned out, he had worked in the CIA in his life, and Old Scout was flown by the CIA from Redmond Airport in Oregon to Michigan to be in the car show shortly thereafter. There's a lot of indirect connections in Santiam Wagon Road. There's no doubt about that. I've got a few quotes here from the Nye family. Great gatekeepers, kept tremendous records. The Nye family has toll records, has passage records, numbers of cattle came through for 25 years on the wagon road in Prineville in their family collection, and they've been agreeable to work with. This is from MJ Nye, who turns out, for a gatekeeper, was fairly poetic. Not that that's a big surprise. They have a lot of time to think about things out there. When the sun shines hot and you are tired of the worries of business and want to get away from it all, sitting in the shade of these friendly trees, angling for a gamey trout in the clear, cool waters of the streams, drinking the sparkling water as it gushes from the hillside, appeasing the quickly acquired ravenous appetite with wholesome food, sleeping beneath the starlit sky, and breathing in the pine-scented air will make you feel like $1 million. That sounds great. And he knew Joe Claypool as a young guy. Joe was old then. He's closing his comments about the wagon road. Joe Claypool's mail and passenger stage have been long overdue. Many snows have covered the mountain pass since Joe's cheery voice rang out, "All aboard!" as he swung his prancing steeds up in front of the roadhouse after a stop there. Joe has slipped down the dim forest trail. He does not come back because he could not fit into the picture today. His spirited horses, though fleet of foot, could not keep pace with these contraptions of iron and steel that usurp the road. Then, too, Joe knows that his horses would frighten at these ill-smelling machines that belch black smoke from their bodies and endanger his passengers. So Joe just stays away. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Let's just give him one big
We work for you.